Okay, so we'll start off with a little bit of backstory on Faust and the Forest of Evil. Faust was added in the version 67 update, New Features, New Creatures, on April 8th, 2009. This update was a continuation of the Master Monsters, which introduced new area bosses for various locations. As the third installment, this update included Dio, Timer, Dial, Faust, and Zeno. Along with these area bosses though came their own new respective quest lines that kind of centered around them. On April 1st, just a week preceding the update, GM Dahlia published a GM blog titled New Monsters Coming to a Town Near You, which was written from a first-person perspective to warn other adventurers. I'm not going to go over all of it, but the relevant portion just for Faust is: the fairies of the forest are not immune to these new perils either. Arwen of Alinea informed me that she was recently attacked by something resembling a giant monkey. In attempting to investigate what happened, I encountered others with knowledge regarding Arwen's attacker. They told me a story of a creature lurking in the forest, summoning zombies, and how it had originated. I came to find that this thing goes by the name of Faust. The rest of my time there was spent fleeing for my life. The next time you adventured Monkey Forest, bring ample bravery, or better yet, a few friends. Sadly though, in version 150, the Rising Heroes Elite update, the area where Faust was located, the Cursed Forest, was removed, stated to be undergoing renovations, and this update was back in June of 2014. And to this day, over 7 years later, still has not made a reappearance. But anyway, getting into the actual story. At some point you end up striking up a conversation with Arwen the Fairy in Alinea, and she's going on about how humans are unbelievably foolish, always putting themselves in danger for a silly fantasy without ever considering what might happen in the end. And you wouldn't argue with her if you knew her story. So of course she tells you it. Not long ago, a monster that was never seen in the forest before had appeared. A monster that resembled a giant, atrocious monkey, like the darkness of the forest. Clearly it had to have been created by magic. A while back, Grendel the Really Old had gotten involved with the magic of darkness. Now, and it was just for a short time, but that magic spell that he had casted back then is still affecting all around Alinea. The monster must have been created because of that too. For Arwen though, it's not a good enough excuse to say that he made a mistake when he was young. You need to find Grendel and tell him to defeat this monster. So you visit Grendel, you tell him what Arwen said, and he apologizes for her obnoxiousness, but she isn't completely wrong. He was indeed blinded by the magic of darkness when he was younger. The Aftermath created many monsters with the power of darkness, such as the zombie Lupin. If you go to the forest north of Alinea, you will find a mysterious cat named Fancy, who you can ask about this monster that attacked Arwen. Fancy happens to know everything that goes on in the forest, so you should be able to glean some information about this monkey. You find Fancy, and he says that his master likes Grendel the Really Old. After describing this monster, Fancy says that you must be asking about Faust. Now he doesn't know much about him because the monster speaks some weird language, but only keeps muttering, Arwen. Faust carries around a strange doll on his back, and that seems to be where he gets his strength, so he's probably being controlled by that doll. If you want to know more, you can collect some cursing nails from the maladies, deeper in the forest. He can identify the scent of darkness from them to find the cursed forest where that same scent exists. So once you bring him back the cursing nails, he tells you that the entrance is in the Forest of Evil, where you can find the strange ghost that is controlling Faust. The cursed forest has been warped, so you should easily be able to spot it, but the ghost only appears at specific times. When you find the cursed forest and the ghost finally, he seems to be murmuring that he cannot forgive Arwen. When he notices you, he is still muttering about Arwen, but then he asks who you are and how you got here. You kind of just ignore him, and then you ask him what he can't forgive Arwen for. And he says it's not a very entertaining story because it's full of the intolerable foolishness of the humans. The ghost tells you that he lived in Alinea, serving his apprenticeship under Grendel. That he dedicated his life to learning magic, especially the magic of the fairies, and that's how he got close to them. He wanted to become closer with Arwen and study magic with her. But in truth, she's the reason why he began studying magic of the fairies in the first place. But she doesn't like humans, and she wouldn't give him the time of day. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get her to see past her hatred of humans. And he didn't expect her to like him, but he just wanted to leave a good impression of himself. Of course, she doesn't even remember his name. It's not her fault, but he wanted to take revenge on her in any way he could, no matter how foolish. He knows anything that he says would sound like a bad excuse, but he still wants you to tell Arwen that he's sorry for everything. So you return to Arwen, who asks about the plan to defeat the monster, and you tell her about this ghost named Reef. But she doesn't know who that is until she remembers Grendel the Really Old's apprentice. And you tell her that he's responsible for creating Faust by casting evil magic on the zombie Lupin, and that he's fallen into the magic of darkness. Arwen says that he's foolish, like master, like apprentice. And then you tell her that Reef did it to seek revenge on her. And she asks how he could be so shameless and dare shove friendship down her throat and take revenge for not reciprocating. Humans are foolish and self-centered, and she doesn't want any guilt trips. As soon as she says the term guilt trip, though, she starts to second-guess herself. She doesn't understand Reef's feelings and actions, but she is feeling guilty and responsible. Now, Reef is definitely at fault, but she isn't devoid of blame either. So she asks if she gives you fairy hair, if you would give it to Reef. It wouldn't be a bad idea to calm his anger down a little bit. So you return to Reef, and he asks if you gave Arwen his apologies, which you didn't, but you give him the fairy hair, which signifies a sincere apology. If Arwen asked you to give it to him, it means that despite how arrogant that she is, she's actually apologizing to somebody. And he realizes that she didn't really do anything wrong, and that it's him who needs to apologize. So now he has you deliver his apology to Grendel the Really Old. It's a lot of back and forth, apologizing, I guess. But for whatever reason, you don't tell anybody that anybody's sorry. Anyway, you return to Grendel, and he asks if you got all the information needed from Fancy. You tell him about Reef and Arwen, and Grendel asks you not to blame Reef. The Reef that he knows is polite and mild-tempered, and he wouldn't hurt a fly. And he must have done something like this because the magic of darkness turns people ill. But Grendel says that he'll have time to reflect on his mistakes after he defeats Faust. Reef will remain anxious as long as Faust lives, and so he sends you to defeat Faust. Now, unfortunately, I believe this is where the client-sided quest text ends. I've scoured everywhere I can think of for information on the ending of this questline, and I just couldn't find anything besides basic bossing videos for GMS. However, a good little egg pointed me towards an old KMS player's blog, who took screenshots of each piece of the dialogue, but I can't read Korean. Thankfully, this egg roughly translated the end bits for me, so big shout out to Ilu. Basically, all that happens is you defeat Faust, and you return to Grendel, who tells you that Reef can rest more peacefully, and it's time to root out the dark energy deep within the forest. You visit Reef one last time, and he's felt the energy of the curse disappear, thanking you for defeating Faust, allowing him to feel truly at peace and not to dwell on the past any longer. He may only be a spirit now, but he believes he can still do good, such as finding a way to purify the forest. And that's about it for the Faust storyline. This is where the questline just completely ends. There's no follow-up quest chains or anything related to purifying the cursed forest. But it does kind of seem like they had set up a possible continuation that would involve Reef, which is kind of why I suppose Nexon bothered with the excuse for undergoing renovations when it was removed from the game. Anyway, I don't think it's entirely outside the realm of possibly returning, since they aren't shy about expanding on Victoria Island with various content, like Eladin or the Parm Ruins, or even the new Sharenian Knights lore. It's just that it has been over 7 years and we haven't even seen a mention of Faust or Reef or the Cursed Forest. Anyway, this questline actually draws a little inspiration from the German folklore of Faust. Now, it isn't really play-by-play, but there's loose influences. As all forms of folklore, there are many different versions and tellings of this story. But the basics of this tale is that Faust is a depressed master scholar, embittered by his learnings and contemplating suicide. He turns towards magic and its pursuit of infinite knowledge. And he ends up conjuring a demon, Mephistopheles, who is a representation of the devil Lucifer. And they end up making a pact, signed in blood, and for the rest of Faust's life, though in some instances of the story the deal is for 24 years, but for the rest of Faust's life, Mephisto will grant his servitude and magic. But in exchange, Faust's soul will serve Mephistopheles in hell. Now, Faust's part of the deal, because he is depressed, is that if he ever reaches true happiness due to anything Mephisto gives him, so much so that he wants to stay in that moment forever, then he will straight up die in that moment. In many versions of this tale, Faust eventually meets a woman named Gretchen, who he ends up pining over. Mephisto actually helps Faust seduce her, but a bunch of tragedies follow. It's a little bit more complicated than how I'm gonna tell it, but bare basics is that her mother dies from never waking up from a sleeping potion, Gretchen gets pregnant out of wedlock, Her brother challenges Faust, but is killed in a duel. Gretchen drowns her child, and then she is held in dungeon for the murder of her child. And when Faust and Mephisto come to save her, she refuses to be saved. And then she gets executed. But for whatever reason, she ends up in heaven because of her innocence. Later on, a whole bunch of extremely complicated stuff happens for Faust, but he eventually reaches a good place where he drops dead from happiness. Mephisto tries to claim his soul, but angels come and basically save him, and then he goes to heaven. However, in wildly different versions of this tale, Faust is basically corrupted, and when his term ends, Lucifer and some other demons, including Beelzebub and Mephisto, come and they claim his soul, and then they take him to hell. Anyway, the parallels are basically in Grendel reaching into dark magic while blinded by his quest for knowledge and power, and Reef kind of simping over Orwyn's PG-13 friendship, and eventually causing trouble, even though she's innocent. Overall, I think it's an alright questline. I like that the Cursed Forest portion of Alinea is sort of explained as the result of Grendel experimenting with dark magic for a short time, which also ended up causing the zombie Lupins. And then Faust is explained to have been the result of Grendel's apprentice, Reef, slipping further into dark magic by casting something evil on one of these zombie Lupin. But for whatever reason, I don't think it's ever explained like how Reef died or why he's a ghost or anything, but yeah, the story's okay. It's not terrible. I don't find it overwhelmingly great or anything, but I do personally enjoy small self-contained storylines that tie into the world and seek to explain parts of the world, which is cool. If you want to subscribe and click the little bell icon, you can get a notification for when I actually do get around to making another video. Also, if you enjoy any of the lore, share the videos with your friends or something, because it would actually help a lot. I'm sure you guys have noticed, but I haven't uploaded much last year, or this year. But I do want to mention that I really appreciate all of the nice comments you guys leave. I read everything. I read every comment. I read every comment on older videos. I read everything. I'm just glad that people are still interested in the lore of MapleStory to the point of like binging a bunch of videos or even posting their own theories or nostalgic memories of stuff. I'm not quitting. Not gonna stop making videos. Just gonna make them when I feel like it. Anyway, if there's anything important that I'm missing, let me know.